Okay.
So the recording is now on.
Okay. Call to order the Lowell Budget Committee meeting for Wednesday, April 29th at 6:17. Roll call, please.
Mayor Bennett,
Here.
Councilor Stratus,
Here.
Councilor Harris,
Here.
Councilor Drott,
Here.
Member Myers, John Myers, Maureen Weathers,
Here.
Lon Drott,
Here.
and Bill George.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. First order of business is to select a committee chairman. Do we have nominations?
This is Maureen. I'd like to nominate Lon Drott.
I'll second.
I'd second that.
Okay, we have a nomination for Lon Drott and a second. Do we need further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of Lon Drott for committee chairman signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Lon Drott is the committee chairman. He'll take over from here.
Okay, looking to get an approval of the agenda.
Move approval. Maureen?
Got a motion of approval. I have a second.
Got a second.
Okay, first and second, any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move forward. Or all those in favor state aye.
Aye.
All right, now moving forward. Looking for an approval of the minutes of the Budget Committee meeting minutes from April 29th, 2019.
It's Maureen. Move approval.
John Meyer, second.
I have a first and a second. Are there any discussions? Hearing none, all those in favor state aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Old business, none. So new business, we'll look for the presentation of the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget. I suppose we'll be waiting for Mr. Cobb who returns.
I think he ran off.
Yeah.
Too much pressure.
So Lon, this is Maureen. What program are you using to do your board meetings?
We've used Zoom in the past, or not Zoom. We used the Microsoft Office.
This Microsoft Teams that we're using
The
tonight?
Teams, yeah.
Okay. I hadn't used
Or-
this one yet.
No, actually, I take that back. We used one of the other ones. I forget what it's called. There's another one that we use in the fire department that we use, but I like this Microsoft one better. Probably the hardest part about it is making sure everybody knows how to use their computers so we don't get feedback.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Oh, Mr. Cobb, we're waiting for your presentation for the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget.
Open that up now. Okay, can everyone see the screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Mute yours while you're working.
Okay, we'll go ahead and put this up. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run through the budget message. For anyone that's on the call, if you don't mind, I'm going to go through the budget message, and then if everyone can go ahead and just mute their mic, and then once we get through it, I will take any questions that you have, if that works for you. That way we can lessen the feedback. So a couple changes that we made to this, that I made to this budget message. The total appropriations for next year proposed are at $4,206,427. This is actually a 2% increase from last year's budget. A number of these projects are the same as last year, and so that's why the amount is pretty similar to last year. An additional $57,658 has been reserved for future expenditures to meet debt obligation requirements. As far as key issues that we look at, these are pretty similar from last year. We're obviously limited to our tax rate of $2.16. You can levy less, but you can't levy more than that amount. Trying to maintain our minimum reserves, having at least 3 months of operating expenditures held in reserve, so that when something like this current pandemic occurs, we've got some time to respond and it doesn't hit us immediately. So we have budgeted that for all of our funds. You will see it as part of the contingency line. So that essentially is what we use for those operating funds to show where we're budgeting our reserve. Training and innovation, we're continuing to fund certifications for our public works operators, as well as our city clerk, and then myself. Infrastructure, this is the big number. And the one thing that I want to stress here is that some of these projects will be dependent on what happens with the economy. We have Main Street and Lakeview improvements that we're moving forward on, and potentially a couple water lines on those 2 streets as well, replacing those. These other projects, we really would like to get them done, but we've got the next couple months to kind of see how the economy progresses, and then the council will have to start making decisions. But we don't want to give, at least I don't want to give the impression that all of this stuff is necessarily going to happen, because it really depends on the economy being in somewhat decent shape throughout the entire fiscal year. We've worked pretty hard over the last few years to get our finances in order, and so the last thing that I would recommend is stretching ourselves too far. The next piece is the economic outlook. Typically do a lot more analysis than this, but to be quite honest with you, having a degree in economics, I can tell you that no one really knows. And so, like I said, we'll wait and see what happens in the next few months, and then we'll have a much better idea for where we're at. This is particularly one of the most difficult times to put together a budget, just because we know there's a pandemic, we know it's hurting the economy, but every local economy is going to be different. If you're in an area with a lot of tourism and restaurants, you're going to be hit a lot harder than, say, the city of Lowell, which only has a couple of those establishments. And so we're just going to have to see how that progresses. Growth indicators, this is a little bit of good news. We're still having housing starts. The past few weeks have been, quite honestly, the busiest that I've had here, because of a subdivision that was just approved at the last council meeting, as well as another one that's in the planning phase. And then we received 2 building permits today for 2 new homes. And so, at least as of yet, that hasn't dropped off, which is a good sign for us. Opportunities and challenges. The school district, I think when all of that work is done, that will certainly be a selling point for our community. Housing, again, even in a recession, we still have a pretty severe shortage. Our housing prices are just as high as you'll find in Thurston and other communities closer to the metro area. federal grants. We tried to make sure we have flexibility in our budget to respond to any grant opportunities that come up. Some of the projects like the library, for instance, could potentially benefit from a federal grant, depending on what comes up. The City Hall project is another one. And so we just wanted to make sure that again, that we had the resources available to be able to respond. But like with the economy, we're not sure what will come or if any infrastructure funding will come that we're eligible for. And so that's something that we'll track and manage throughout the year. Level of service. We can get the library renovated. That will be an incredible increase in our services. And so that's one. We do have a part-time position budgeted to manage and coordinate volunteers to make sure that we're open Monday through Friday. And we also have some funding in there for digital media and programming. Parks maintenance. We purchased a new mower this year and also a tractor the year before. And thankfully, we have a pretty good staff that's able to use the equipment. And so we're going to continue to improve on our maintenance and mowing of not just the parks, but also our right-of-ways. Street maintenance, we also have an allocation of $10,000 for crack and slurry sealing. And I know that Public Works has already put out a request for bids for that work as well, or for quotes rather. Then our tractor can be used for alleys and streets. Revenues, oh, this is really getting buggy now. This is just an overview of our revenues for the year. We're anticipating about a 3% increase, so nothing too surprising. Much of that increase is just because of, or some of that rather, is just because of the new building that we expect will occur in housing, which I know it sounds strange to say that, but at least the one development that was approved there, they want to move pretty fast. If you've been up and down Bob Straub Parkway, you know that there's a subdivision there that's going up pretty quickly, and so there's still building going on. One reason may be just because we have pretty low interest rates, and I will tell you there are a lot of folks, particularly your millennials, that are trying to get in and purchase housing now because they feel like recession is the best time to be able to do that. And so we're hoping that that continues. The other increases are because of projects, and so you see a list here for Rolling Rock Park, Osgood Library improvements, smart water meters. That is just the city's share. There's a grant that we're looking at, and so that's just the city's share of a potential grant, and then loan proceeds for the parks and the streets. The next one, I'm going to apologize because I already found an error on it, which you notice 2017 and 18 is exactly the same as 2021, which is not correct. 2021 is correct. However, the transfers are included in there. So the trend is still the same, but this number is higher than it should be. It's correct in all of our line item budgets. We changed the way we did our summaries this year, and so that's just an error in that formula. We should have removed the transfers. The expenditures here, again, it's all about those capital projects. That is, we have not increased, other than that librarian, really our services. And so pretty much the entire increase is because of all of these capital projects. And again, just noting for both the budget committee and the public that just because money is budgeted doesn't mean it's going to be spent. And so we will monitor this as we go through the year. Capital improvement plan. Again, I won't belabor that because we've already discussed the projects, but there is a capital improvement plan included at the end of this budget. Debt management, you can see the debt service that we have listed here, 154,986, of which 40,348 comes from the general fund, which is pays for the new library building as well as the properties that we purchased. That's what that is for. When City Hall moves over to the library temporarily, the idea is that at that time, your other funds will essentially pay rent for using the facility. But this is intended to be a permanent library, and so that's why it's been set up that way. And then finally, just want to thank everyone for participating in the budget committee. We've really put in a lot of work over the last 4 years to improve our organization, and we're hoping now that we'll be able to complete some of these capital improvements so that the public can really see the difference that's been made over the last few years. And with that, any questions on the budget message?
Okay.
No questions?
Okay, do we have any public that's with us tonight?
And we do have Chairman Drott, we do have a part of the agenda for the public comments as well.
Yeah, that's what I was seeing, if there's anybody there for the public comment.
Oh, so we won't get to that yet, I don't think.
That's letter B under new business.
I know, but I have not. Typically, we've gone through at least the summaries for each fund. Okay. And so I will leave that to the committee for what you would like me to address. But typically, we've at least gone through the summaries.
Okay.
Would everyone like to proceed with that? Okay. So we will. So we'll go ahead and go through the general fund. So you should have the general fund summary up in front of you. The resources you can see are actually a little bit less than last year. But again, our differences are in your grant revenues and in the projects. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to stop me at any point. Departmental expenses. Again, you can see that it's actually proposed lower for this next fiscal year. Much of that, again, is because of capital projects. Parks and Recreation is slightly lower, and that is because last year when we did the budget for Parks and Recreation, it was to do the entire Rolling Rock project all at once, and we've taken more of a phased approach due to the feedback that we received from our last grant application. And so this is a little bit less and just includes the turf or grading turf, irrigation, sidewalks, and a playground on the southern end. And then we're going to do our best to stretch those funds to the north end as well and put in the turf and irrigation up there as well.
Hey, Jared, this is Maureen. How do you want us to ask questions? I'm used to Zoom where you raise your hand and stuff, but do you just pipe in?
Whenever somebody speaks, it actually, their picture actually does pop up. And so feel free to just stop me if you have a question, because I can see you.
Okay. So in your budget message, you mentioned that the revenue, the appropriations are 18% decrease from the previous year. Is that right? But
so that actually, that was an error. And so that's why if you see, if you can see my screen now, I changed it to 4206. And that was because there were non-departmental expenditures for the SDC funds that didn't get included in that amount.
Okay. Okay, good. So
go ahead.
So at this point, you haven't done any kind of reductions based on the current economic climate.
So the only reductions that we did on our revenues was for tourism tax, because we know that that's going to take a major hit. We don't, and it sounds awful to say this, we don't expect much of a change in liquor tax or marijuana tax.
Probably get an increase from what I hear on the news.
And that's essentially what we've been told. And then our highway taxes, we did take I did reduce that by, I believe, 20%. And it could be more. Frankly, that is the revenue that I am most concerned with.
The reason why I ask is because it looks like the proposed budget, you're in deficit spending, and which is expected, at least in school districts statewide. But if you hadn't already planned for much reduction from the economy, I suppose that'll just be handled in a supplemental budget. But that's you start with. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. So we actually we do have some capital projects which are going to take some of the reserves that we have. We're actually budgeting to have more in reserves though this year than last year, and part of that is just because, again, for how Rolling Rock Park was budgeted, and doing a little bit less there. But the other revenues that we have that we rely on a lot are our property taxes and utility revenues. Property taxes collections may be down slightly. Typically in the following year or two, you pick those back up. And so not too concerned about those yet. And then utilities, which we'll talk about here in a little bit.
Okay.
Utilities, at least so far, we have not seen a huge drop off with utilities. But that's one that we'll watch as well.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. So going through here, this is the detailed revenues for general fund. Again, the property taxes, like Maureen Weathers mentioned, projecting a small increase there. Grant revenue, we are crossing our fingers that we get one of two grants that we've applied for Rolling Rock Park. The library grant, that is money from foundations and other organizations, and that is something that we're currently working on, and we did have one soft commitment, hoping that the pandemic doesn't change that, but we're still hoping to move forward with that project. And then franchise fees are the other major resource that we have. I think at this point, and I hate to make this joke, but I think the last thing that we all want to get rid of is cable. So I'm guessing that revenue will stay consistent.
What about the water and sewer franchise fees? That's new. Did you make a change there?
So that is a proposed change in that. So as you know, your electric, your cable, for telephone, everyone pays franchise fees. Our lovely utilities always like to pass that on to the city and make everyone know that to them it's a tax, but really it's for them renting and using the city's right of way. And so for years, for water and sewer, we have treated water and sewer like a business. In the sense that the city, all of our departments pay water and sewer. And so the only piece of water and sewer that we weren't treating like a business was in actually allocating franchise fees for that. And so essentially what this is more or less an accounting exercise, in that this is something that would have to be, first of all, they'd have to be adopted by the council, but essentially proposing that 5% of just the sales be transferred to the general fund as a franchise fee, just like we do with our other franchises. And so it's essentially treating water and sewer just like we do garbage, telecom, and cable.
But the council hasn't acted on that yet?
Not yet.
Did you
No,
say?
but that has not been acted on yet.
All right.
But it's
I have a
not just.
question.
Sure. Just to follow up on that real quick though, just to be clear, this is not a fee that would be put on people's water bills. So it's not, we wouldn't need to pass that on. Go ahead, Counselor Stratus.
Okay, so I see the land use development jumping significantly from 6,000 and some to 15,000. I assume that's for the 26 lot development we just approved. But I do not see a jump in building permit and electrical permit fees. Do we only expect that development to go through to the land development stage this year and not see any development of the individual properties and actual housing going in this year?
No, so we do the budget. We have a hard time budgeting for building permit fees, which I think the council knows. But the land use and development fees is really intended for any new development work. And then also, for instance, expenses for those subdivisions. So they have to put in public infrastructure and then we have to inspect it. Our city engineer will. So we know that those expenses will go up for sure. Building permit fees, as long as we're talking single family homes, which at this time that's what we're looking at, then this should cover those. But as always, this is something that could change. We'll have to see what happens. This is always the most difficult to budget. But we essentially budget the money to come in, the money to go right back out. So it's pretty much a wash. The big jump that you see, just so you're all aware, the big jump that you see in 2018-19, this 151,000, that is from the school projects. There was approximately $100,000 in permitting fees for all of the school improvements.
Much to Walt's chagrin.
Sure, but we still had to pay for it, so it had to go somewhere. But that's why I said this is always difficult to budget. We don't want to just throw a really high number up there that we don't have anything to base it on. But if somebody came in with a multi-million-dollar facility, then yes, it would certainly necessitate the need for a supplemental budget to deal with that. Any other questions on revenues? I think we hit the big ones.
It's Maureen again. I had a question about the capital asset disposal, and then I saw later, I think you said properties in Rolling Rock and Paul Fisher, and then somewhere else. Do you want to address that now or later when you get into detail?
I can address that now, and this is basically a placeholder. We haven't made any decisions on what property will be surplused. But at the end of the day, it was difficult to show any work, for instance, to say a Paul Fisher Park or some of the other improvements without showing some sort of offset. And so, like I said earlier, to do some of these projects will require that the economy for us locally stays in a fairly stable place. And then for Paul Fisher Park particularly, or for other improvements to Rolling Rock Park, we probably would want to look at some type of surplus of property. It could be where the city hall is located. It could be the eastern section of Rolling Rock, or it could just be the city lot that we own at Highland and North Shore, because we do have a buildable lot there as well. Any other questions? If not, I'll go ahead and move on, and I'll just go through these departments. If you'd like me to spend more time on them, please just let me know. So changes in the admin. These are pretty much, well, the work plan is pretty much administrative work. So governance handbook for city council. We have a new software for recording work orders, and so putting that together so that we can track our response time. Nearly all of the items that you'll see on these work plans are from our strategic plan. So these are all things that we just approved within the last month. And so these are all projects that we've discussed. Here's the detailed budget for administration. Again, I think you can see personal services are pretty steady across the board. We did make a slight change in allocations 2018 or the 2019-20 budget, and we're proposing to keep it the same. So 0.36 FTE. Materials and services. Again, pretty consistent. The major difference you'll see in material and services is that we did have our I believe it was the downtown master plan that was charged to this account. And before that all happened, we did, let me see if I see the budget number. We did a supplemental budget to be able to account for that. So this needs to be corrected, but that was done just a few weeks ago. And so that didn't make it in. So that was done before we spent the money. We were on top of that. Any questions on admin? Questions aren't going to hurt my feelings. So that's, you're more than free to ask questions. Okay, Parks and Recreation. This is one of the larger budgets out of the general fund. So some of the items, again, completing a lot of projects. So Paul Fisher Park has really been our #1 focus, or I mean, sorry, Rolling Rock Park is the #1 focus. Paul Fisher Park, the railroad corridor is below the Sunridge development. And so we are supposed to any day now receive some funding from FEMA to cover our cleanup costs there. We've talked to our engineer about putting in a more permanent trail there as well. And so we're going to do that with our staff and our tractor this next year. Host at least six community events. I hope you'll let us off the hook for that one, because that probably will not happen. And then here's the detailed budget for parks. Personnel is up. We have budgeted for a temporary position, and they're allocated across parks, water, sewer, and streets, because this position would help with the grounds maintenance. Material and services, pretty consistent with last year's budget. We did a little more work there than you can see we initially anticipated. Much of that was due to the building that was removed at 53 East Main. And then capital outlay, again, all those capital projects that we mentioned, and those are detailed in the capital improvement plan at the back. Police is basically the same as last year, with just an increase for inflation.
Jared, it's Maureen. I had a question on the 2021 work plan, purchase vehicle to increase patrols. Who's going to be driving that?
So actually, one of our local residents is a reserve for Oak Ridge. And so the benefit of having somebody already here is that when he leaves, he's immediately patrolling. And so if we have a vehicle for him here locally, then he doesn't have to pull one from Oak Ridge. And so the idea was we would have one here locally for him to be able to use.
So that'll be signed with Lowell, City of Lowell, not Oak Ridge Patrol or whatever it's called?
No, so it's, and we haven't gotten quite to as far as marking it. I'm trying to recall now what the conversation was in marking it. It's not going to say Lowell Police Department because we don't have a police department. But essentially, it's a vehicle that we would essentially own.
They call it LoPo.
Oh gosh, no, that sounds terrible. I guess it's better than, if it was Loco, that would be a little worse, but
There's an opportunity for some citizen input there.
I'm sure it would be entertaining for sure. Let's see. Okay, so then I will go ahead and move down to community development. So this is where we pay for the city planner, building inspector, and our city engineer on any kind of master planning projects, as well as economic development. So 2021, we've actually purchased some modules for tracking our planning applications, which will be a huge help for us, as well as code enforcement. And so I don't think we've actually purchased it for building yet. I have to double check that one because it's a community development module and then they have other pieces beneath it. So I can't recall offhand if it covered the building permits, but that's something that we could definitely use right now, because I will tell you that as questions come up on properties, oftentimes we have to go back and forth between Northwest Code professionals many times before we're able to resolve it. And so that's been a challenge that we've uncovered recently, and much the same with our subdivisions. So right now, if somebody asks for questions about a subdivisions or conditions of approval, we're going through paper files, which if it's recent, it's not a big deal, but if we're talking 10 years back, it can be quite the challenge to put all the pieces together. Any questions on community development? Okay. Moving through the detailed requirements. Again, not much change with personal services. Materials and services are a little bit less, only because some of those larger projects are done. The downtown master plan was one, for instance. The other contract services, the 7,500, is what we currently have a contract with Oregon Rain through the end of this year, and our contribution is 7,500. So for the budget, I've kept that the same, and I know they would like to come and give a presentation to council for that same amount moving forward. Library, very similar to last year. Again, building renovations and then hiring a part-time librarian. Those are, that's the focus for the library. And that's what you'll see here in the detail. The one change we do have is that we are budgeting for the maintenance worker, because that position will handle some of the maintenance here at the facility. The rest of it's pretty similar to the last budget, with the difference being that we have a little bit better idea for what our utilities will be like here. Okay, moving on to code enforcement. Very similar to last year, with the exception that we do have again, a module now to track code enforcement complaints and violations. We'll be really excited to get that up and running because that will help staff immensely. That is an area as well that Oak Ridge has voiced that they would be willing to assist us with moving forward. but no major changes to code enforcement. The only little change you'll see is other contract services, which we have had several. That is for Lane County Animal Control. We have a contract with them. We've used them several times. It's pretty sporadic, so we felt comfortable lowering that amount. Tourism. So this is essentially what we use for, we've got a community grant program that we typically allocate $3,000 for. In the past, some past projects, Pine Needlers, Quilt Show, they purchased some equipment. The Dexter Lake Farmers Market, typically we support them every year with some type of marketing project. And then also Paddle Sports Day, which this one hasn't quite hit the budget yet. We got their reimbursement receipts and they emailed them to us, but they got lost in the emails and they never brought it back up. And so I just recently found them, and so that will be coming out of here. And I think that's $1,400. That was highly successful. We had 2 planned for this summer, and we've already, unfortunately, had to cancel both of them. You don't see a huge hit to this budget only because we do have some carryover from the prior year that we're not spending. Last year was the best year that we've had with tourism funds from Lane County. Municipal court. No major changes to municipal court. So it's pretty comparable to last year. And then moving on to non-departmental, there are a couple changes you'll see here. One is for the debt service amount, which we discussed, which is for this building, the library building, and for the parks. And then on the reserves, that is for the property that was donated from the Nelson family. And what we found is that we either do one of two things. We either contract that out to somebody to take care of, or we do it ourselves in-house. Regardless, we charge whatever our labor time is for the city, or if it's a contract, we charge the amount of that contract. And it's $500 doesn't cover it. It's not nearly enough. And so we're trying to be a little more realistic in that we know that we will probably be looking at spending about $2,500 a year. And so that's why you see this change, this increase or decrease in reserves, is because we're spending the money. And then contingency, you can see we're budgeting a contingency of almost $91,000, which is quite a bit more than last year's budget. But again, we wanted to make sure that we have funds set aside so that we can react to however this economy changes over the next year.
Hey, Jared, just because you know how anal I am, it looks like in your table that the contingency says 30,502, but on the next page, your detail, it says 60,502.
Let's see, 30,502. I see it. Yep. Thank you. And stuff like that, yeah, if you see it, please let me know. That way we can correct it in the draft that goes to City Council. Okay, so on to the water fund. So here's an overview of the water fund. And this is probably a good time. So typically during the budget process, since I've been here, we've had a discussion about utility rates. As you know, the first couple of years I was here, it was a little painful because we increased rates, I think 10% one year and 6% the next, to try to balance both the water and the sewer funds. And so the sad thing is we're finally at a point to where we're able to complete some projects, financially very stable. And so one of the things that council is going to have to decide is what to do with those water and sewer rates this year, considering that we expect some type of recession. Again, Lowell is a small community, and so how much it impacts us could be totally different than another community. And we haven't really seen a major hit yet. And so this year's budget still shows a 3% increase. But I think we need to have a longer conversation, probably in a work session, to discuss that increase, whether to have it at all, or if we want to do something like you see in cities like Veneta and Crestwell, where they do have a program to help folks on their water bills, and it varies from city to city. I think Veneta's, they will provide up to a 25% discount on the base rates, just the base rates. In Crestwell, I don't know off the top of my head what they use, but essentially, if the council wanted to do something like that, it would be more of a targeted approach to helping folks out. And the way that they're typically set up is they typically use pretty hard and fast rules. And so you'll either see an example like Veneta, where they basically use the same income requirements that I think is used for USDA. And so it's based on the size of a family. And once a year, you have to submit a form that with your documentation just showing that, yes, you fall within this bracket and you're approved for that discount. Others handle it such that if you're on a federal or state assistance program, then that proof is provided. And so there are a number of ways to do it, and we don't have to do anything, but considering I think the situation we're in, it may be something that we would want to explore if we continue to increase the rates for inflation. It's just a discussion that'll have to be had, and I don't know that we're at the point to having a really big discussion tonight, but just wanted to put that in there because it would impact the budget. The good thing about this budget is that we do have some flexibility. It may impact future projects, but we do have some flexibility in both the water and the sewer fund. It would just mean that you would have likely a small deficit or at the end of the year, not just a year-over-year deficit. So you'd still have healthy reserves, but we wouldn't have the carryover that we're anticipating right now. Any questions on that before we move forward?
So Jared, this is Lon.
Yes, sir.
You have loans, payments, and proceeds with a $250,000. Is that going towards the capital outlay projects?
Yes. So we have several projects, and again, these are they're in the budget, but it's dependent on. So Main Street and Lakeview Avenue both have bid alternates for replacing the water lines. Our estimate's about $70,000 for each one of those. And then if we move forward with the water meters, even if we receive the grant, we would still be responsible for 55% of that, which is about $110,000. And so that's where that number comes from. Any other questions on this overview of the water fund? Okay, then I will go ahead and move forward with the resources. So this is the more detailed list of accounts and resources. The grant revenue would be the USDA revenue for the water meters. You can see our water meters or our water and sewer sales here. Still projecting those to increase. The reimbursement SDC, so that's the reimbursement portion of the system development charges. And so we have budgeted funds for that. Moving on to the summary. So 2019-20, finished the year without any major violations. Just submitted our annual water report out. Should have gone out today, actually, or no, that will go out on the 1st because it's going out with the bridge, and we'll also put it on the website. The work plan for 2020-21, again, meeting water quality requirements, replace the water meters and implement the automated meter reading system, replace the water mains on Main and Lakeview, and then developing GIS for all of our water infrastructure, this has been one of the biggest challenges that we've had with new subdivisions, is just having accurate mapping information for water lines and also on the water plant. And so if we develop that, it would more likely be something that's managed by LCOG because they have a GIS department, but it would allow us to have access to some pretty important information and to ensure that we've got everything mapped correctly. In last year's budget, we did for both water and sewer, we had a contract for water and sewer master plans. And so essentially, because of where we're at with the economy and some of that uncertainty, we didn't want to put in those full amounts because it's a pretty expensive project. The estimate for a water master plan is about 100,000, and for sewer, I think it was 80,000. And so this is a major component of that plan. So it's a big step forward for us and get something off of our plate when we do move forward with that plan. But at the same time, having that done will provide a lot of data and information for us when we're working with developers. Water requirements, water fund requirements. So here's the detailed budget for this department. Not a huge difference in personal services, pretty consistent. Materials and services, this is where you can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, that's the 40,000 for documenting all of our existing infrastructure and water and putting that into GIS. That may be less. We wanted to make sure we had enough in there to cover it. Let's see. And the rest of it is pretty consistent. Any questions on the water department's budget? This is just to point this out, so this is the full amount for the water lines on Main and Lakeview and the water meters. So even if we receive a grant, we still have to budget the entire project. And then on the debt service for water, you don't see it to this year, but the following year, we will have a debt payment coming off. And so the idea being that any work that we had to fund through a loan would basically be covered the following year, because we do have a debt service payment that will be coming off. This also touches on, I think, the point that Maureen Weathers made about having a deficit. Some of these, again, are because we've got 15,740 going to the water fund. You can see we've transferred money every year. The reason we did this was because we're having to do this budget for it every year, and the goal is to have one payment, and the requirement from USDA is to have one full payment of $39,380 in that water reserve fund. We have the resources to do it now, and so this is just us basically suggesting that we just go ahead and make that transfer and get it done, because every year we have to confirm that with USDA. And it's not money being spent, it's just money going into that fund in case there was a need. And then here's our contingency that's budgeted for next year. Sewer fund. So here's the overview for our sewer fund. One of the healthiest beginning balances that we've had in a while. It's taken years to get to this point. Again, we're still factoring in a 3% increase for inflation on rates. SDC revenue, we do expect a little more just because of the new subdivision that's already been approved. And we have another one right after that it should be coming to Planning Commission in the next couple months. I'll go ahead and move on to the detailed resources. Stop me again if you have any questions on the resources, but pretty consistent. So sewer fund expenses. Again, our work plan for this next year, the one that we always have, which is to meet our permit requirements, and then also the GIS as well. One expense that we haven't mentioned yet is that one of the things that we've struggled with in the past for water and sewer is being able to retain staff, especially the utility operator positions. And to be frank, it's because in large measure, we have not been competitive or even close to competitive on salary. And so we, at the recent council meeting, went ahead and approved a new pay scale for all of our staff. The real change was on the utility operator positions or utility worker positions. They're both budgeted out of this first line, or out of this line here. And so the starting salary for that position is now $15 an hour, with the expectation that they will work towards their certifications every year. We've had really good fortune to have the two new employees that we have. They work very hard. And these certifications, folks, if they're not familiar with these fields, requires quite a bit of studying, good math skills, and so you really need to have an aptitude and a work ethic to be able to get these certifications. And so, considering that I think the first year I was here, I think the minimum salary was $11 or $12 an hour, and there's just extremely difficult to be able to hire folks at that rate and keep them for any length of time. We really want to continue to build their skill sets, so then our public works director can focus more on the bigger picture instead of the daily tasks involved in those positions. Materials and services. Again, we have the $40,000 budgeted for GIS work. Other than that, it is pretty comparable to our budget last year. Any questions on the non-departmental, the debt service, or the transfers? Again, the transfer is just like with the water fund, and that we're proposing to go ahead and make the final transfer for that, so we don't have to be concerned about that reserve moving forward. If not, we will go ahead and move through to the street fund. This is the fund that I would say that we were most concerned with and we'll have to really follow for this next year. You can see in the overview here, we're expecting to collect, anticipating around 64,000, which is the lowest that we've received in quite some time. There is certainly the potential that it will be less than that. Our original budget was, with COVID aside, would have been over 80,000 for this, for state highway tax revenues. But we did give it a 20% cut because we know that it's going to be down quite a bit, including for this for the current year that we're in. We were expecting to be almost at that $80,000 mark, and we're anticipating that will be quite a bit less for these next few months. The grant revenues that you see there, those are grants we've already received. Those are from the ODOT Small City Allotment Program that we've applied for, and so we've received 2 separate grants from them. And so those will go towards the Main Street and Lakeview projects. The loans and proceeds, payments and proceeds. This is, part of this is for Lakeview and Main. Most of it, however, is for the proposal for Cannon Street. And so that would be the first project that we would cut out of this budget. And so we're really going to have to just see how things transpire, because right now we've got it in the budget, but we'll need to see if things are starting to turn around, I think, before at least staff would recommend moving forward with that project. Okay, moving on to the detailed resources. Again, you can just see everything that I just outlined for the state distribution, the grant revenue, and the loan proceeds. Street division for next year. So planning North Shore and Pioneer Street improvements with Lane County. So we do have some improvements to be made at the intersections of Pioneer and Lakeview, as well as on North Shore. We would like to have some parallel parking along North Shore Drive, and so we need to make sure that we do that planning with Lane County so that we get the project we'd like to see. Lane County has applied for funds once before for the section of North Shore between Moss and Pioneer, and so we're going to continue to work with them and see where they're at on their application. And we've already mentioned Main Street and Lakeview and Cannon Street, so I won't go over those anymore unless you have questions. Personal services. The only real change here is in the, and it shouldn't say utility worker 3. That's actually just an error on the title here. That is that temporary position. So we have allocated part of it here just because they will do some street right-of-way maintenance, mowing, mostly. Materials and services, we've got a $10,000 allocation for patching and seal coating. And then these are all of those street improvements, because again, even if you receive a grant, you still have to show the expenditures for that side as well. Questions on street? I'll go through Blackberry Jam quickly. Essentially, we plugged in a budget like we're going to have a festival this year. And part of the reason is because much of this comes down to timing as to when funds are spent. And so even though we canceled the festival for this year, there will be some funds that will be spent more than likely in the fall and in the spring. And so we wanted to make sure we still had a budget here, but obviously if we're not putting on a festival, our expenses will be less. But it's just very difficult depending on when invoices are sent out and when registrations are paid for because it falls right in the middle of our fiscal year.
Jared, did you say the festival for 2020 has been canceled?
It has.
Oh, I hadn't seen that anywhere.
It has.
Somebody asked me and I didn't know.
Yeah, we sent an email out to all of the folks that are currently on the committee, and I'm supposed to put together a press release, but again, all this kind of happened right at the same time as budget, and so that just hasn't happened yet. But it has been canceled, and we've notified all of our vendors that we have on our email lists. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions on Blackberry Jam if you'd like, but essentially much of this is being consistent with prior years and is essentially a placeholder for when we get to the point of planning for the event. SDC fund, we don't have anything in this fund because we transferred funds a couple years ago to individual SDC funds so that they would all be segregated properly. So there's nothing to cover on that fund. It will eventually be closed once all the activity is gone. I will go ahead and just scroll through that unless you have questions. Parks SDC fund. So we have budgeted for 15 new housing starts. And the requirements are simply placed in capital outlay if we have a project that we want to complete. For instance, Paul Fisher and Rolling Rock project list has to be updated since we had our Parks and Recreation Master Plan done, and so there may be funds that are eligible for both of those projects, but the methodology needs to be updated first. That's one reason why you'll see this $2,000 in materials and services, because that is to get assistance on that methodology to make sure that we have a project list that allows for us to spend money on these projects. Any question on parks, SDCs? Not. Here's the detail. If not, I'll go ahead and move to street SDCs. Again, same assumption, which is 15 homes. So that's what you'll see in the proposed for SDC revenue. These are actually the same. For the requirements, same thing. We've budgeted some funds to update that project list. And then also, again, in accordance with that project list, we can use those on a project. You cannot use them on a maintenance project. So for, say, Lakeview or Main Street, those would not be eligible. It's mainly with our existing project list, it is sidewalks, one of which is the sidewalk on Cannon Street. And so that is a potential project that we could use that for. Water SDC fund, same thing, 15 projects or 15 homes is what we're estimating. Sources here, same. Just there, and then requirements. Same process, 2,000 for that project list, and then the improvements in case we have a major project that we decide to move forward on. Sewer SDC fund. Again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but planning for 15 homes. And the same thing with the expenses. We have 2,000 for an update to the project list. And then we also have funds available for any capital projects. But again, they all have to be on an updated project list and have to be eligible increases to capacity for the sewer or the water system or parks. Stormwater is the last SDC fund. So I will scroll through this and just stop me if you have any questions on it. These are the two reserve funds we're required to have for our loan agreement with USDA. And so you can see here at the bottom where it says reserve for future expenditure, we need to have one full loan payment, which is $39,380, and it's actually a little bit more than that just because of interest that we earn. So once that transfer is made, we will no longer have to contribute to the water reserve fund. And the same thing for the sewer reserve fund. I'll go ahead and scroll down to it. The amount of the, I believe, is $15,744 roughly. So we have a little bit more than that, only because of interest earned. And then if we make that transfer of $59.20, we'll no longer have to make those transfers. It helps us out a little bit moving forward with budgeting, just because then we essentially all the money that comes in, we're not having to deal with transfers and other expenses that aren't really, they're not really operating expenses. And so this kind of helps clean up our budget process a little bit. And I think, let's see. Good fund. This is one change from prior years in the past. And when I first started here, we'd always taken money from the general fund, the street fund, the water and sewer, and transferred it to the equipment fund. And then when we had a piece of equipment we needed to purchase, it was purchased out of the equipment fund. This is something that our auditor isn't crazy about, our accountant isn't crazy about. And the reason being is because when you purchase asset, at the time of purchase, you then have to, a fund has to have the owners maintain ownership of that. So at the end of the day, it ends up going back to your, it ends up getting shown on your water fund financial statement, your sewer fund financial statement, and governmental as well. And so basically we've gotten to a point to where we're able to reserve enough money in each one of our funds to make those payments directly out of the funds. And so if we were to buy, say, another tractor, not that we need one, but if we did, we would essentially allocate that expense to all of the funds, the water, sewer, streets, and possibly parks, or general fund rather, that would be using that tractor. And so it just saves us some transfers back and forth. Otherwise, the auditor wanted us to make the transfers to the equipment fund every year and then transfer the money back to then make the purchase. And so considering the fact that we're in pretty good financial shape now, we didn't really see the need to continue with that practice. It doesn't mean that the council couldn't require a reserve in each one of those individual funds. That's something that we could certainly do, but as of right now, we have enough reserved there to be able to plan for these expenses.
So Jared Maureen again.
Yes.
So for shared equipment, then you'll buy it out of this one, or you'll allocate the purchase out of stuff, but then don't you have to, even though, depreciation doesn't really matter in public agencies, we still have to record that. So
Right.
it seems to me like it's making it more complex. And then second question is, so the mower, for instance, that's shared with parks and streets because of right-of-ways.
Right.
So is there a supplemental worksheet tracking system that says when you need to replace that mower rather than having two, one in each one that says here's half a mower and here's half a mower?
Right. So we budget for those larger expenses like vehicles. We put them in our capital improvement plan. And so what would happen is when we get to the year where we're replacing equipment, it would just be allocated across those funds. And so, like I said, there are a couple of ways to do that. It could be that we essentially have a reserve just like we had for the Nelson maintenance for those funds that we had held in reserve every year. So you can do it that way. Or you could just ensure that you always have a healthy enough reserve and you continue to update your capital improvement plan and just plan for those expenses. And so this current budget, we have pretty adequate reserves. And so any capital expenses that we are planning for next year, we've just allocated across those funds. And we do have the one thing that's a little different than in the past is we do have a fixed asset module that actually handles all of our depreciation, which we had not had in the past. So it was the last year, the year before, where we actually went through the entire fixed asset list because it used to be maintained. Before I got here, that list was actually just maintained essentially by the auditor, which isn't the most proper way to do it. And so now that's actually done in-house.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So here's the detailed sheets for resources, but essentially we're just proposing to transfer those funds back out to the funds where they originated. Debt reserve fund. We have exhausted all the funds from this debt reserve fund, and so there isn't any activity that you'll see here. The only change that you'll see is the council did approve transferring the remainder of that, which is basically interest that's accrued over the last few years, out to the sewer. Let's see, I believe it was the sewer fund. Yep, to the sewer fund. And so that is the only activity that we have showing in our current fiscal year. And so this is when we talked about, water and sewer funds having a healthy balance. Some things that folks need to understand is that we've gone from at one point having a reserve fund that was essentially making those loan payments every year to now the water and sewer funds are able to make those with the resources that we have. So it's a pretty big improvement in finances and water and sewer funds. That's all I have. I'm sure that's more than some folks may have wanted to hear, but that's the presentation of the entire budget. In front of you is the appropriation summary. And let me check one thing real quick. There we go. So as was mentioned earlier on during the about the budget message, so these amounts for capital outlay didn't make it on into the right spot on this table, and so that's why this number is higher than what you originally sent. It's not that we increased expenses anywhere, it's just that it wasn't calculating correctly. And so I believe on your agenda, unless you have any major changes, you should have the correct amount under F. Again, you all can certainly make any changes, but if you don't have any changes under F, that amount mirrors what you have here on this appropriation summary. And with that, I will turn it over to the chair for any other questions on the presentation of the budget and then public comments.
Do we have any questions from the committee? And hearing none, do we have any public comment for the fiscal year 2021? So hearing none, we need to, if I'm correct, we need to stay this meeting and open a public hearing?
Yes,
Correct,
sir.
Jerry? So the public hearing is open at 7:39. The purpose of this hearing is to provide the public with an opportunity to suggest potential uses of state revenue sharing funds. City of Lowell anticipates receiving the following for fiscal year 2020-2021. In state revenue sharing, $10,917. Cigarette tax, $1,341. A liquor tax of $20,292. And a marijuana tax of $4,386. Do we have any public comment on how these funds should be spent?
And just to add on to that as well, Chairman Drott, so we do also receive funds for highway taxes, but all those monies are restricted for highway operations.
Okay. So hearing no public comment, we can close the public hearing at 7:40 and go back, reinstitute our committee meeting. And now we'd be looking for consideration of the fiscal year 2021 tax rate of 2.1613. And on your agenda, under line item D is a suggested motion. That I would be looking for somebody to make.
All right, I'll do it. Green here. I move to approve the fiscal year 2020-21 tax rate of $2.1613 per $1,000 of assessed value.
I'll second that.
I have a first by Maureen Weathers and a second by John Myers. Any other discussion? All those in favor state aye.
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 All right.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passed. And then letter E, consideration of the fiscal year 2021 utility rates. Jared, that is something that just goes through the council?
Is, like I said, I only kept this on here because it's something that we've made a practice over the last few years. I think this year is a little bit different. And so if anybody has any feedback, that would be great. Otherwise, I think we'll take this or my recommendation would be to take this to the council for more discussion.
And Maureen, again, I'd encourage the council to look at, depending on how it shakes out and how people are affected, so that we don't have people leaving the area, and taking all their kids away because they can't afford, utilities. I know that we're not any more expensive than anyone else, but you know what I mean? If there's something we can do and do it prudently, fiscally prudently, I would encourage the council to look at that.
Agreed. Do we have any other comment for the utility rates?
This is Gail. I'll just say we will take that into consideration. Definitely.
Okay, then we'll be looking at consideration of the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget. And I'll be looking for a motion to approve the fiscal year 2021 budget for the city of Lowell, Oregon in the amount of $4,264,085, of which $57,658 is unappropriated and reserved.
I make that motion.
And I'll second it.
Okay, I have a first by Bill George and a second by John Myers. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor state aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Jared, is there any other business?
No, sir. Thank you for your service. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And we would look to adjourn at 7:44.
Thanks all.
Jared,
good.
Great
Thank you.
job. Again.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
That was, wow.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Kitchen
I
now.
thought I'd
Sorry
be
to-
here till 10.
Well done.
I bore you for an hour and a half.
No, seriously. It's so much
Did our
better.
best to move it along. All right. Well, thank you all very much. And was there a motion to adjourn? I didn't hear that.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
I'll second it.
I have a first and a second. All those in favor state aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Motion carries.
I'll drive
Night.
out. I'll drive
Night,
out.
you
All right.
guys.
Have a good
See
night.
y'all.